This is MTG Burgeoning, and everything you need to know about this channel, from subscriber reward series and giveaways to regularly scheduled content and programming, can be read in the description below. It's Build a Deck Tuesday, and in today's video we are going to complete the channel's first ever Oathbreaker build as we finish off Garruk Apex Predator. Hello and welcome back, MTG Burgeoning community, to this momentous Build a Deck Tuesday video as we complete the channel's first ever Oathbreaker deck. And we can promise it will not be the last. For anyone who missed any of the previous installments in this little mini-series, you can click on the links in the description below and you can get right up to speed. Our Oathbreaker is Garruk Apex Predator, so we're going a Golgari build. Garruk is our Oathbreaker, and our signature spell is Finale of Devastation, both determined by the MTG Burgeoning community. They voted to have Garruk be the first ever Oathbreaker from a pool of 5 other planeswalkers, and then from a pool of 5 potential signature spells. The community decided to go with Finale of Devastation. Last video, we installed the creatures of this deck, and very briefly, here they are. Finn the Fangbearer, Direfleet Poisoner, Gifted Aetherborn, Hooded Blightfang, Varragoth Bloodsky Sire, Embodiment of Agonies, Grim Dancer, Vampire Nighthawk, Nighthawk Scavenger, Leyline Prowler, Gonti Lord of Luxury, Endling, Ronus the Indomitable, Questing Beast, Poison Tip Archer, Acidic Slime, and that will be the last of our creatures added to this deck. In today's video, we are going to install our non-creature spells, our land base, and that's going to complete our first ever Oathbreaker deck. So let's begin with those non-creature spells. As you noticed from our pool of creatures, we are going with a Death Touch theme. So what better way to augment that strategy than including a copy of Vraska Swarm's Eminence. She's 2 and any 2 combination of Golgari mana. She comes into play with 5 loyalty counters and has a static ability of whenever a creature we control with Death Touch deals damage to a player or a planeswalker, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. We can also remove 2 loyalty counters from Vraska to create a 1/1 black assassin creature token with Death Touch that has, whenever this creature deals damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. A very good addition to a format for a very good addition for a deck in a format that is going to be swimming with planeswalkers. So Vraska is going to help to solidify our Death Touch motif in this deck. So now let's move to some mana rocks. 1 copy of Golgari Signet comes down, we tap 1, tap it, and we get a black and a green to our mana pool. 1 copy Golgari Signets, including with 1 copy of Mindstone. Tap for a colorless mana, or tap 1 and tap the Mindstone and sacrifice it to draw a card. And the next mana rock is going to be 1 copy of Arcane Signet. Turn this bad boy sideways, and for all intents and purposes in this deck, it gives us a black or a green mana. And our last mana rock to be included is the Talisman of Resilience. Comes down with a CMC of 2. We can tap it for a colorless, or we can tap it to add a black or green to our mana pool and take 1 point of damage. 4 mana rocks. Now let's move on to some mana ramp spells. 1 copy of Farseek. We search our library for, in this instance, a swamp card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. 1 copy of Farseek, and its polar opposite, 1 copy of 3 Visits. We'll search our library for a forest card and put that card onto the battlefield. A Farseek of 3 Visits. Next up, we're going to talk about a little bit of card. Hang on one moment. All right, that's much better. So we're going to talk about a little bit of card advantage here and include a copy of Regrowth. This was one of the options of the signature spells that did not make the final cut for the signature spell, according to the MTG Burgeoning community. However, I think we can find a spot for it here in this deck. 1 and a green sorcery, return any card from our graveyard to our hand. That will come in handy a lot more than you may think. All right, now we're going to move on to the removal portion of these cards, and we're going to start off with one copy of Wilt. One in a green instant, we destroy target artifact or enchantment, or if unneeded, we can tap 2 and cycle this card, therefore discarding it to the library and drawing a different card. Removal theme continuing with one copy of Pernicious Deed. One black and a green, we can tap X, we can sacrifice Pernicious Deed to destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with converted mana cost X or less. Please notice that in this rules text is omitted Planeswalkers. This will not touch Planeswalkers. However, it will definitely clear the board of any troublesome or problematic artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. One copy of an Apocalypse Favorite in Pernicious Deed. Another removal spell, and a wonderful spell for multiplayer formats, is Vertice's Maneuver. 2 and a black for a sorcery. For each player, choose friend or foe. Each friend returns a creature card from their graveyard to their hand. Each foe sacrifices a creature they control. For the intents and purposes of this deck, I don't foresee choosing many players other than myself being a friend. Next up, we have a copy of Soul Shatter. 2 and a black instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost among creatures and planeswalkers they control. This is a great spell that's going to be awesome in this format, particularly because of the number of players in it and the number of times we're going to have planeswalkers all over the battlefield. Staying with the removal, we're going to include one copy of Vraska's Contempt. 2 and 2 black. This instant reads, exile target creature or planeswalker, and we gain 2 life. How do you not include something that's targeting an Oathbreaker? And we gain 2 life as well? Sign me up for that. Another removal spell, this being the deck's Saga, and that's going to be a copy of the Eldest Reborn. 4 and a black, the Saga comes down, and when the first lore counter goes on, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and again, or a planeswalker. When lore counter number 2 is put on, each opponent discards a card. Then when the final lore counter is put on and we sacrifice the Eldest Reborn, we put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. It does not have to be from our graveyard. It does not have to be from an opponent's graveyard. Any graveyard will do. One copy of the Eldest Reborn. Next up is Casualties of War. Similar to Regrowth, this was one of the options for the MTG Burgeoning community to select as the signature spell of this deck. It did not garner enough votes as the signature spell, but is definitely powerful enough to include in the deck itself. 2 black and 2 green, we can choose any number of the following modes: destroy target artifact, destroy target creature, destroy target enchantment, destroy target land, destroy target planeswalker. This discard could be absolutely devastating, particularly if you have ever cast successfully a copy of Decimate, the Gruul spell that is very similar to Casualties of War. All right, next up, still staying with the removal portion of this deck, one copy of In Garruk's Wake. Is that enough flavor for the community? We got Garruk as the Oathbreaker and In Garruk's Wake as our mass removal spell. Destroy all creatures we don't control and all planeswalkers we don't control. The flavor, the Vorthos in me is just brimming from ear to ear. This is a fantastic inclusion for the deck. In Garruk's Wake. All right, and lastly, we're almost done with our spells here. One more removal spell, and that will be a copy of Finale of Eternity. X and double black, destroy up to 3 target creatures with toughness X or less. If X is 10 or more, return all creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. In this deck, achieving 12 total mana should not be too much of a concern, so it is very likely that we'll be able to cast Finale of Eternity for its big X ability. All right, that rounds out all of the removal spells. There's just 3 more spells left in the deck, and all of them have to do with getting some creatures into play not from our hand. One copy of Rise of the Dark Realms. 7 and 2 black, put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under our control. With the large number of Death Touch creatures we have and all of the removal that we've just seen, we could surmise there being a very high possibility that there will be many creature cards in graveyards all around. We'll invest 9 mana and put every single one of them into play under our control. Rise of the Dark Realms could be considered a potential win condition in this deck. Next up, we have a copy of Green Sun's Zenith. X and a green, we search our library for a green creature card with with converted mana cost X or less, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library, and then we get to shuffle Green Sun Zenith back into our library. The primary target here will most likely, as I shift the card slowly downward, the primary target here will be Finn the Fang Bearer, as he will allow our death-touching creatures to give poison counters to our opponents. There are also some choice green creatures available if we need some spot removal in the form of acidic slime, or if we need to get rid of a beater, or if we need to go find a beater like Questing Beast to take out some planeswalkers. Green Sun Zenith is going to act as a nice green creature tutor for us. And last spell of the deck, we're going to include 1 copy of Court of Calling. X and 3 green, it has the Convoke mechanic, of course, which means that our creatures can help cast the spell. Each creature we tap while casting this spell will pay for 1 colorless mana or 1 mana of that creature's color. And when we do that, we cast the spell and we search our library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield. Then we shuffle our library. As this being an instant, we can definitely hold Court of Calling back in our hand, send a myriad of Death Touchers into combat, and if enough blocks are not made, we can Court of Calling Finn the Fangbearer into play from our library and see that our opponent get upset and leave the game. 1 copy of Court of Calling. And that will conclude the spell portion of this deck. Now we're going to insert the mana base, and there's not going to be too many surprises here, so I don't believe we need to do an entire video just for the lands. We are going to include a total of 22 lands in this deck. So we're going to have 7 copies of Basic Swamps. We are going to include 7 copies of Basic Forests. This brings us to 14, and we're going to have 8 non-basic lands in order to help smooth out the mana base. The first land, of course, is going to be a command tower. It's going to tap, and it's going to give us a black or a green. We're going to include the Golgari Shock land of Overgrown Tomb. Comes into play tap, but we can pay 2 life, and when we do, comes into play untapped, and it can give us a black or a green. Since we're in a multiplayer format like Oathbreaker, including a copy of Undergrowth Stadium is preferred. It comes into play untapped as long as there are 2 or more opponents. And of course it taps for a black and a green. All the lands left are going to do a black or a green, or in some instances, additionally, a colorless. The Golgari Checkland will be included. Woodland Cemetery, taps for a black or taps for a green. We have the Kaladesh Fastland of Blooming Marsh. It will enter the battlefield tapped unless we control 2 or fewer lands. Tap for a black or tap for a green. Now, this does have the propensity of entering the battlefield tapped a lot more frequently than some of the other cards in this deck. Actually, this has the greatest likelihood of entering the battlefield tapped, so we have to be careful that we're not hurting ourselves just to include a land that can give us each of our 2 colors. So we'll be keeping an eye on you, Blooming Marsh. We have the Golgari Horizon land, Nurturing Peatland, pay a life, add a black or a green, or tap 1, sacrifice it, and draw a card. 2 lands to go. We have 1 copy of the Golgari Painland, Llanowar Wastes. We can tap it for a colorless, or we can tap it for a black or a green and take 1 point of damage. Lastly, we have a very underrated cycle of lands from Torment, and that's going to be Tainted Wood. We tap this for a colorless, or we can tap this for a black or a green, an ability that we can only activate if we control a swamp. Tainted Wood is land number 22, and that will complete this first ever MTG Burgeoning Oathbreaker deck. I'd like to thank the MTG Burgeoning community for the selection process of our Oathbreaker and our signature spell. Deck number 1 is completed. Stay tuned for deck number 2. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.